July 20, 1969, the entire world holds its breath. Over 500 million people, the largest television audience in history, watch a single flickering black and white image. A fragile human figure, dressed in a bulky suit, steps onto the dusty surface of another world. This is Apollo 11, the moment the United States achieved what once seemed impossible, landing a man on the moon. But this was not just a scientific triumph, it was the crowning victory in the most intense rivalry of the 20th century, the space race. To understand why this moment mattered so deeply, we have to go back to the very beginning of the Cold War, when two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, competed for dominance in every arena, including the high frontier of space. It all started with a beep. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite. That tiny, 23-inch sphere orbiting Earth sent shockwaves through the American public. The United States had assumed technological superiority, yet now Soviet rockets could potentially deliver nuclear warheads anywhere. The next few years only worsened the humiliation. In 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, orbiting Earth once before landing safely. The United States scrambled to catch up, but its early launches often ended in fiery explosions or public failures. Then, on May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy stood before Congress and made a bold, audacious pledge: "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth." At that moment, the moon became the ultimate prize, and NASA began the most ambitious engineering project in human history. To get to the moon, NASA needed a rocket unlike any ever built. That rocket was the Saturn V, a towering 363-foot behemoth that remains the most powerful machine ever constructed. It consisted of 3 stages, each packed with millions of pounds of propellant. At liftoff, the first stage's 5 F1 engines produced 7.5 million pounds of thrust, enough to lift the entire stack off the ground and send it hurtling toward space. Atop this titan sat the Apollo spacecraft, the command module, where the 3 astronauts would spend most of the journey, the service module, which provided propulsion, power, and life support, and the lunar module, the fragile, spidery craft designed solely to land on the moon. The astronauts themselves were Neil Armstrong, the mission commander and a civilian test pilot, Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot and a U.S. Air Force veteran, and Michael Collins, the command module pilot, the man who would stay behind in lunar orbit, alone, while his 2 companions touched history. On July 16, 1969, at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Time, the Saturn V roared to life. The entire launch complex shook, and windows in nearby buildings shattered. As the rocket cleared the tower, Mission Control in Houston held its collective breath. In just 12 minutes, the vehicle reached Earth orbit. Then, after a check of all systems, the third stage reignited to push the astronauts onto a translunar trajectory. The next 3 days were a mixture of routine and wonder. The crew performed engine burns course corrections, ate freeze-dried space food, and looked out the windows at the Earth shrinking behind them. They crossed 250,000 miles of space, a void of silence and darkness punctuated only by the radio chatter between Columbia and Houston. Finally, on July 19, they entered lunar orbit, circling the moon 10 times before the moment of separation arrived. "The Eagle has wings," Armstrong radioed as the lunar module undocked and began its lone descent toward the Sea of Tranquility. The landing sequence was the most critical and dangerous part of the entire mission. As Eagle descended, its computer began issuing alarms: program alarm, 1202, then 1201. In the cockpit, Armstrong and Aldrin had seconds to decide whether to abort. Back on Earth, 26-year-old guidance officer Steve Bales recognized the alarms as computer overload warnings and gave the crucial go-ahead to continue. But then another problem emerged. Eagle was flying too fast and overshooting its intended landing site by several miles. The designated landing area was littered with boulders and craters the size of cars. Armstrong took manual control, flying sideways over the lunar surface, scanning for a safe spot, while fuel for the descent engine ticked down to critical levels. Controllers in Houston watched the telemetry with clenched fists. With just 30 seconds of fuel remaining, a landing signal finally glowed on the console. A calm voice crackled from the moon. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." The time was 4:17 p.m. Eastern, July 20, 1969. Humanity had arrived on another world. After the landing, the crew ran through checklists and had a brief rest period, but Armstrong and Aldrin were too excited to sleep. 6 hours after touchdown, Armstrong descended the ladder. He pulled a ring to deploy a TV camera, and the world watched. With his left foot first, he stepped onto the lunar surface and said the words that would echo through history: "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." The time was 10:56 p.m. Eastern. For the next 2.5 hours, Armstrong and Aldrin collected rock samples, planted the American flag, deployed scientific instruments, and took photographs. They left behind a plaque that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." Meanwhile, Michael Collins orbited alone in Columbia, waiting behind the moon, cut off from all communication for 48 minutes each orbit, the most solitary human being in the universe. When he emerged, he would rejoin his comrades and bring them home. The return journey was equally tense. Eagle's ascent engine had only one chance to fire correctly to lift the astronauts off the moon. It did so flawlessly. The crew docked with Columbia, transferred samples and equipment, and then jettisoned the lunar module, leaving it to eventually crash into the lunar surface, a permanent monument to their visit. The trip back to Earth took another 2.5 days. On July 24, the command module splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, southwest of Hawaii. The astronauts were immediately placed into quarantine, as scientists weren't sure if lunar microbes could harm Earth. But they were safe. The mission was a success. The space race, in effect, was over. The United States had won the Apollo gamble, and the Soviet Union, after a series of failures with its own N-1 rocket, abandoned its lunar program. The Cold War would continue for another 2 decades, but the moon, the ultimate high ground, belonged to America. Apollo 11 was more than a political victory. It was a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and collaboration. The technologies developed for the moon missions, from integrated circuits to satellite communications, spawned industries that transformed modern life. The Earthrise photograph taken by Apollo 8 inspired the first Earth Day and a global environmental movement. And the image of astronauts bouncing on the moon gave people a new perspective on their own fragile planet. Yet, after 6 successful landings, the Apollo program was abruptly cancelled in 1972, a victim of budget cuts and shifting priorities. No human has set foot on the moon since 1972. But the legacy of Apollo 11 endures. It reminds us that when we dream big and work together, we can achieve the seemingly impossible. The phrase, "We came in peace for all mankind," was not just an inscription, it was a message from every one of us who looked up at the night sky and dared to reach for the stars. Thanks for watching. If you found this valuable, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos.